Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge and let's do a little smile. Oh.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're going to be talking all things weight selection. We're going to go through percentages, the RPE scale, and prescribed weights, give you our thoughts on the pros and cons of each approach, and potentially give you a new way of thinking about how to choose weights for your training. But before we get into it, a big thank you to our sponsor, Wit Fitness. Check out the new Summer 2021 range out very recently, depending on when we release this one.
On the Instas. That was great.
Yeah, that's it. The chocolate mint coloured shorts are a particular favourite. I think Will Griffiths described them as extra dicky. So choose supportive or unsupportive underwear as you prefer with those. And check out the website at wit-fitness.com and use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. But let's get into it.
Yeah.
So percentages, RPE, which stands for rate of perceived exertion.
Exertion. Yeah, exertion, like you're exerting.
Yeah.
Not an excursion, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, mine's on the holiday already. And prescribed weights. So this is basically when somebody's writing a program, what percentage of your 1 rep max should you be using for a particular set? And then they'll give you your sets and reps. RPE is based on effort. So how hard is it out of 10 generally in your own perception? And prescribed weights is a little bit more nuanced. So somebody might say do this exercise at 80 kilos. That could be based off a percentage in the coach's eyes, or it could be RX for a workout in a CrossFit setting, which comes from the medical term, which means as prescribed. So depending on what the intended stimulus of the workout is, the person designing the workout will generally give male and female RX weights, and you might get options depending on whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced from your gym as well. But those are the 3 main methodologies for deciding what weight to use in a workout that we're going to go through today. So Rob, you've done a lot of lifting in your time. Tell me about different experiences you've had using percentages, RPE, and prescribed weights.
Well, percentages, I'm obviously quite a fan of. A lot of strength training is obviously based off percentages, and especially weightlifting. I think weightlifting it's always like 87% or 87.2%, and you've got to lift that. And a lot of the time, especially if you're going in feeling right, that is just the perfect weight, and it's just right, especially if the coach knows what they're doing. And with prescribed weights, it's definitely. I've personally found that if a prescribed weight is written on the board, especially within a CrossFit setting, that is the weight I'm using, even if I'm going to struggle, because it's all egotistical there, and I'm not going to do less than the RX weight because I'm strong enough to do these things. I'm going to force my way through this, even if it means I'm going to struggle. And I know we're going to go into a little bit more why that is a terrible thing to do. But that's essentially what I've done over the years, and it's not always been the greatest scenario for me to come out of. But percentage training is definitely something where I think has the strongest case for being what you should do, because rate of perceived exertion, like when we've discussed on the previous podcast 2 ago, I think it was, and when it was used in the recovery, and that was it. And feelings are a shitty indicator of truth and of how you feel on the day. And this is where personally I feel I like to blend both percentage training and RPE together, because it's especially from what, and I know you'll probably be similar with your clients as well, but where I deal with a lot of city people, well, I used to be when they were always in the office and so forth, but sometimes they come to me after a really heavy day of work, then meetings back to back, sitting all day, high stress. And they could be in, say, we might be following a Wendler cycle, or 5-3-1, and they might be on like a ones week where they're supposed to be hitting that heavy one. if they come into the gym that day and they've got to try and hit this heavy one, I'm just like, they're just not in the right frame of mind, especially if they've got a number, say they've got to hit 100 kilos, that's what's predicted. And they've come in and they then don't hit that 100 kilos and they hit, say, 85. Not only do they leave that session feeling a bit down, a bit ashamed that they didn't hit what they were prescribed, but they're just, it's just not a nice place to be, because you see failure rather, and because you won't take into account the feelings of stress and all those other things. Whereas even though the coach knows these things, or they should know these things, it can cloud your judgment essentially. So what about yourself? What about you over there? I know you've dabbled a lot.
Yeah. So I've tried loads of different strength programs over the years, and generally they're percentage based. And I think what I want to do today is sort of dig into the deeper reason why that style of programming has become so prevalent. And it basically boils down to the fact that people want to give the same program to different people. And you can't say Jim Wendler's sending out his 531 and his numbers are super high. He can't just chuck that over the fence to somebody else and say, yep, so we're going to start with 3 sets of 5 at 250 kilos. And someone's just like, I've got no chance of doing this. How do I make this applicable to me and my strength level? And he's like, oh, okay, so that's like, around 65% of my max. So that's what I'm going to use for this many sets and reps. So the purpose is essentially to adjust a program to an appropriate level of challenge for an individual, so that you can use the same or similar program for people who are stronger or weaker than each other. And the reason why you want to train sub-maximally is that you can't max out all the time. Your nervous system can't handle it. There's obviously a greater risk of injury if you're always close to your 1 rep max. And on the other end of the spectrum, it stops people pussing out and not lifting enough to get a stimulus. So we need to regulate the training intensity and volume to be appropriate and give an appropriate level of challenge to bring about training adaptations. However, as you rightly said just there, on a given day, somebody's nervous system might be under attack from multiple different angles, and that isn't reflected by a percentage. So if you do have to hit 95+% of your 1 rep max and you're tired, you haven't slept well, you haven't eaten enough, you're very stressed at work, the chances of you actually being able to pull that out are relatively slim. So what's the purpose of the training session overall? Is to get you stronger and to move you forwards, so you can still get a positive training stimulus without hitting that exact number on the program. And I think that's takeaway number 1, is your body doesn't know what percentage is on the bar. It doesn't know how many kilos are on the bar. All it knows is the physiological signals and stimuli that it's receiving. So how much mechanical tension is going through a muscle fiber, how much metabolic stress is occurring, like the build up and the acids that are formed from respiration, and how long is it working for. Like, those are the things that the body actually detects and responds to. So it almost becomes immaterial as to what's on the bar, in the same way that you can grow a bicep from doing a light bicep curl with really strict form, or you can grow it through a pull-up. The net effect on the bicep can be similar, even though the movement's entirely different and the amount of force going through the body as a whole is different. And I think having that lens of getting really dialed in on the stimulus you're trying to create does give a more balanced perspective on whether RPE or percentages or prescribed weights are appropriate or not.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, as you mentioned there, coming from like the coach's perspective. So like when you're looking at your client and seeing the type of person that have turned up today. I had this actually happen this morning, and one of my clients come in, he smashed out 6 bench press, 6 deadlift last week at, say, I think it was 75 kilos. So should be able to get a little bit more for 5 reps quite easily, and struggled with 60 and for 2. But currently they're under a lot of stress in their life. You know, they're planning a wedding, which is all around this lockdown stuff, which is incredibly stressful. He's got like the housing situation, you know, with the mortgage, the holiday thing that's coming to an end. So he's got so much going on. And then he turns up today and it's like, and he was lifting. I was like, so I scaled it back without saying, no, it's not for you. And I scaled it back and I was like, let's do here today for still the 5 reps. Because today, that weight that we scaled it down to was going to give him that same stimulus. And I said the exact same thing. I was like, the number is arbitrary. Like, it doesn't matter. You're still going to get challenged by these 5 reps. And I wanted to challenge you for 5 reps this week. Yes, okay, it would be nice if we was able to hit more. But that's not life. And this is essentially why I took when I created my own Rob's strength method, and it's essentially, I love 5-3-1. I think everything about that. I think it's a great program for like low volume-ish. But the one thing I always kind of struggled with was going into the gym saying you have to hit this 95%, say, on week 3 for 1 or more reps or whatever it is, right? And especially when I was doing it with clients, it's just that different people were turning up every day, and you know, each session was different. So all I did, I kind of span it on its head, and I said, build to a heavy 5 for the day. Then in week 1, build in week 2, it's build to a heavy 3 for the day, and then week 3, it's build to a heavy 1. And then from that, rather than then working up in set percentages, I then worked down, and that's where we got the volume in. So they've built up to say a heavy 5 in 3 to 4 sets. And because we'd have a rough idea of the target that they'd be going for, I knew around 5% either way roughly of a goal. And that's where we start with. And then we taper off. So then we go to say 85%, 75%, 65%. And on that last one of 65%, it's a plus set where we then do say 9 or more reps, because it's a lighter load. So it's a little less stress on the body, but then they'll be getting more volume through the muscle, more volume in the movement. And then it's percentage based off of what they hit that day. So 65% might be 100 kilos one day, it might be only 80 kilos another. So it's taking the individual and who is there at that moment to actually give them the correct stimulus. And it's been pretty good so far for myself and all the clients that I've done it with. And I think because it blends the thing of percentages and RPE, and this is then where I think we need to be a lot more comfortable with that, and because it's a hard thing to do, because as we said, that with the feelings that indicate a truth, is because you can turn up and you can feel great, but your body's not primed. I think Whoop is a good example. You know, when it says 26% and I'm feeling great today, and you turn up and it's like, so you think you feel good, and then you're not lifting. Why am I not lifting good? I feel great. It's because your body's just not in that state. So.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to pick up on there, which I think is another commonality between all great strength programs, is the plus set. And so if you're not familiar with plus sets, it's basically a max out set. So you'll do some work building up to a main set, and you'll rep out at that weight until you can't rep out anymore, either a technical failure or an absolute failure, depending on your risk appetite. And the key about that is that you're using a heavy weight. It could be any percentage, but you're doing it until you can't do it anymore. And that is the stimulus. Like, you are pushing your body to its limits, which is what triggers the adaptation and the strength gains. If you're always working within yourself, you never give your reason the body to get stronger. Whereas in the plus set, because you are getting close to that limit, that is the stimulus for adaptation. And it almost doesn't matter what percentage you work at. For hypertrophy, it doesn't. Like, the studies are very clear that almost any weight and any rep range can work, provided it's difficult enough. And it's not dissimilar for strength, in that if you try to lift your 1 rep max twice, that's going to be very demanding. Equally, if you try and lift your 10 rep max 20 times, it's going to be very demanding. So that overload and stress on the body, obviously within reasonable limits to maintain safety, is what you're looking for in a strength program. And if you are super strict on your percentages, you can miss that by either going too heavy and working too hard, or not going heavy enough and working hard enough. So having the element of both, I think, is a great feature of the program.
There's there was that study done by I I think it was Brett Schoenfeld and stuff like that. It's like 10 sets of 3 versus 3 sets of 10. And talking about hypertrophy there and saying like what is the best, and essentially they both come out around say similar, and that's the thing it is. But you want to think it's like if anyone's ever done say 10 sets of 3, for me that's much more up my street, lower end weight and just lifted heavier and more of rather than 3 sets of 10. So again, it then plays to the individual, which which you know isn't right or wrong, but if I'm choosing 10 sets of 3 over 3 sets of 10, I have to ask myself, am I just hiding away from 3 sets of 10 because I don't want to do that much volume? So then I guess it comes down to the question of what am I training for? Do I need to do those 3 sets of 10? Or realistically, can I do the 10 sets of 3 because I'm more power lifter where I'm going to be lifting just ones? So do I want to just stay closer to that?
That's a great point. I think well, the interesting thing about it is it's the same volume, but it's a very different workout. So it's still 30 reps. And the fact that you have a preference for 3 reps over 10 is another great point for why percentages can have some negatives, in that depending on somebody's fast to slow twitch ratios, they have a preference for like explosive and short duration versus less explosive and longer duration. You get some athletes who have a 10 rep max, which is very close to a 1 rep max, and some where it's miles apart. So generally more fast twitch, more explosive athletes have a bigger gap between their 1 rep max and their 10 rep max, whereas more people with better muscle endurance essentially can have 10 rep maxes, which are unbelievably close. We were saying just before we started recording, Nick Rouse, don't know if you're listening, but he used to work at Gymbox as well. I can't remember exactly what it was. I might misquote him, but I'm pretty sure his 10 rep max back squat was about 95% of his 1 rep max, which I just find absolutely astonishing because he can just repeat that nearly max effort again and again and again. Whereas most people, it would be way off. And it again just shows how 90% for somebody might be a challenge to get 2 or 3 out, but for him he could get 10 or more. So the stimulus is very different, and knowing what sort of athlete you fall in, or what sort of body type you have and what your body has a preference for, will dictate how that stimulus affects you, or how that session gives you a stimulus. And like you said there, Rob, like being very clear on where that training is taking you. If it's taking you towards a powerlifting meet, then being able to produce near max efforts is way more appropriate than 10 reps.
So something I found really interesting as well is that when we're talking about percentages and stuff like that, so you say 10%, so we'll just use that as a number. Now, like this is kind of when I think about prescribed weights as well. Now, when you have, say, I got a client I was working with, and so we was working towards like his deadlift and his strict press, right? Now, the strict press 10% increase is so minimal, but anyone that's done a strict press knows 10% on your strict press is hard as fuck. And it's like, it's literally, it could be say like 3 kilos, right? Say up to 5 kilos. And it's just, it is rough as, but that same 10% on a 200 kilo is 20 kilos. So it's like, so it's having also the perception of load, because when it comes to like the RPE of like the rate of perceived exertion, a lot of that also is determined by as you approach the bar. So the mindset that you're going into the set with and all this stuff. And if you're seeing on the like the strict press, right, as an example, I've put on 2 kilos, and you go to press that first rep and you're like, fuck me, that's hard. Like your RPE will go straight through the roof, because you're now telling yourself this is a lot harder than I thought and everything. Whereas if you put 10 kilos on rather than say the 10%, so say 5% on the deadlift, you're like, this is barely anything extra, because it's such a big difference. And it's like the mindset it's a massive part of all this. And this is then where the RPE thing I think can be really sketchy, especially with like loading, because you need to have the right mindset going into lifting heavy weights.
Definitely. And I think we talked about it on an earlier podcast. They've done studies to show that when people don't know what's on the bar, they can always lift more. And that it's such a interesting phenomenon because it shows, like you said, how psychological it is. You can psych yourself out just by thinking something's going to be heavy, and if you just go for it without thinking about what's on the bar or whether or not you could do it, if you just think you can do it, you're probably going to be able to. You're going to give yourself a better chance of actually lifting a weight. Or yeah, it's just not psyching yourself out. Like whenever you get to round numbers, whenever people attempt 200 kilo deadlift or 100 kilo clean for the first time, they always psych themselves out and do stuff different just because it's that round number.
There's my 130 kilo snatch is exactly that. As soon as I knew what I was at, and I psyched myself out when I was going to go for 140, and I was like, put the 135 on, and I then knew, I told myself, and watching back the video, I performed a completely different snatch. It's like, why? But and I remember doing it with two of my clients at WIT. So when I was training Maria and Laura, I'd done both of them. Laura was with her front squat, and it was just she was stuck at a weight for a while. And I remember we were going up, and then I just put on these smaller numbers that she just didn't know, and we'd surpass it because it's how you look at the bar and think, okay, I can do this. So I guess percentage training, it's been around for such a long time that it's not going anywhere. So do you think there's a better way of doing it? And do you think it should be changed? And how would you change it?
Yeah. So I don't give many percentages except in back off sets similar to you in the Rob Strength method based on a number for the day. I think the most important thing is to teach athletes to get an understanding of what good form is themselves and appropriate level of challenge. Once you know what that's like, it's just about establishing a baseline and progressively overloading it. It's not as sexy to sell as a innovative method, but that is the principle of adaptation, right? You do something well, so you're safe and you've got good technique and you're executing the movement effectively, and then you just continue to progress it over time, and that is getting stronger. Nothing really progresses linearly, so you're not going to be able to constantly add weight, but using sets like total volume, sets and reps, and weight as variables, you should be progressing in some way, shape or form over time. And it can be as simple as that as long as you're writing everything down, you might not have increase every single week. Like you said, if you've got a high stress week, something's going on, you might have what you would perceive as a backward step, but you're still getting a stimulus, so you're still getting stronger in that week. So that the next week you might make a jump based on 2 weeks ago. So as long as you're aware of what you're lifting and the level of challenge is appropriate, you will continue to make gains. And percentages, I think, have a role in giving people a rule of thumb or a heuristic to estimate what they should be working at roughly, but a little bit of leeway around that is essential to make sure you're getting the right stimulus on any given day.
Yeah, and I think that's a massive thing is the leeway part. And whether you're the coach or the athlete, it's understanding it's okay to not hit 87%. And maybe it's a day of 82% or 85%. But the 87% is there for is to kind of tell you to not go above it. So that's that, because obviously the goal of that the intended stimulus of that set is to be around 87%. So that's the thing. So they're trying to give you the guidance. So the people that love to lift heavy often, it kind of helps you rein it in and say, look, this is really the top part I want you to aim for, and then work around that bit. But that comes again from experience. And I think the more I don't know, it's just as I've got older, I've just become a lot less bothered about what I used to be the worst for. I'd see someone lifting a 200 kilo deadlift as like their top set, and I'll come in cold and lift it, and I'll be like, what a twat. What? And I look back on myself doing that, I think, what a prick. But I now, for me, I'm just like, it's the type of thing where go into these like sessions with the goal in mind of being challenged, as you said there, and aim for around however your training is set out. they aim towards those type of the stimulus that's intended and not feel so bad. I think it's the feeling bad and feeling like essentially worthless if you miss it. So I remember from coaching classes, and like when we were doing, say, we were in ones week or threes week of, say, Wendler, and people would feel so demoralized if they didn't hit it. And it can really affect a lot of people, especially when they're invested so heavily within their training, their progression. They're doing everything outside the gym, they think, but they're not taking everything into account of what might affect it. And sometimes it's just an off day. Sometimes it's just one of those shitty days, even if you've done everything right.
Yeah, exactly. There's loads of things that can be going on that will affect your performance, but it doesn't mean it's a waste of a session. And yeah, I think I just wanted to double down on the point you made there of being conscious of the stimulus that you're trying to elicit, whether it is a pure strength stimulus, whether it's hypertrophy and like metabolic stress is something you're looking for, but also skill acquisition is another reason why people will prescribe percentages to stop people going too heavy, like you say. And if you're trying to improve a motor pattern and it's too close to your 1 rep max, your body's going to struggle to use a different technique or find another way to achieve the task. And yeah, one of my favorite examples of this is, imagine you're trying to change your golf swing, but you're trying to hit the ball as hard as possible the whole time. It's going to be very difficult to make changes to that technique. And that's why a lot of weightlifting stuff is at low percentages. What's it not, skill and technique changes are at low percentages, because if you're close to maxing out your snatch, you're probably not going to be able to do it in a different way. Whereas if it's with an empty bar, then you've got a much better chance of changing that bar path or altering the timing of particular aspects of the movement. So skill acquisition is another stimulus that you could be going for with percentages.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely one of those ones where the ego is a strong part in all of this, and this comes from personal experience, as I said there. But it's like, because having an empty barbell and, say, struggling with a position and saying I need weight to get myself into a position, and I say that from exactly the words come out of my mouth. I need a heavier weight to put me into this position, which just means I don't own that position, and I'm forcing myself there. And I'm all for, whether it's good or, well, I know it's not great, but using a heavy squat to get deeper in my squat, because I feel I can stabilize it. But essentially what I've seen from my own videos and my own issues, that when I hit that bottom position, I see where my glaring weaknesses are, where my hips shift and stuff like that, because I'm using a load that I'm just not, I might be able to squat it, but I'm not squatting it how you should squat it. And that's that skill acquisition part, where I've just gone too heavy for my position. So I think that's a huge trade-off when it comes to lifting, like percentages, because especially if you did, so this is this is where I guess people also get it a little bit wrong sometimes, where they base things off their 1RM, not off, say, like Wendler's great because it bases off your 90%. So if you hit 100 kilo, say, deadlift, you're going to base everything off of a 90 kilo deadlift, and then percentage, which always means you'll be within that boundary of being able to keep your skill acquisition still relatively good and still perform things correctly. Because that one deadlift that you hit when the stars aligned and just everything was perfect is not you every day. So by, say, working off 90% means that should be you. It's giving you wiggle room for being able to turn up every day and should be able to perform the task at hand. And
it's just always cracked me up, because I think he calls it your training max versus your actual max. And rather than doing 60% of 90%, you could just do the maths and use different percentages off your one. But he basically uses it as a bit of confusion to trick people into using lighter weights and lower percentages. And it is that ego point that you were saying before, that most people doing a strength program want to be strong and appear strong, and making it more palatable for them to use lighter weights is a big part of good programming, because you've got to give them enough justification to accept the reason for working a little bit lighter than perhaps they want to. And it was always just struck me as a funny quirk of the program that you're doing 60% of the 90%.
Or 52% or whatever. So I used to write on the board. I say like, guys,
Exactly, yeah.
this is the percent of your 100%. Don't worry about the knives. They're like, this is what it is.
Exactly,
Just deal with that and go from there. And because the thing is, I guess a lot of the time, I know this happens a lot in classes, especially because obviously everyone's getting like, hyped up with people around them, what they used to. And I guess people don't want to necessarily underperform. So they don't want to necessarily understimulate your strength. So they want to make sure they're doing enough. But a lot of the time they go over. And I think that's a big thing, because when it comes to working with people around you in competition, that's great because you can feed off their energy and stuff like that. And like we said in our podcast, training versus competing versus testing, like that podcast, I think we spoke in depth about this particular thing. And it's just like, you need to remember, if you are trying to get stronger, you're training, and it's making sure you're working in that area of your training. And every so often, push yourself, but
Yeah, exactly. You're trying to get better. You're not trying to find out where your absolute limit is. You just want to, exactly.
Yeah. Mate, beautiful. This is right on my street, talking about these sort of things. So love this. I hope you guys got plenty of takeaways from this. I think it's really clear. Well, I'd hope it was clear that, as with everything, it always depends, right? You need to think about, what are you doing and why are you doing it? What are you doing it for? We say it nearly in most episodes, it's always understand your why. So not necessarily why of life, but why are you doing any particular movement that's going to then help you in one way or another, or is it going to actually take away? And I guess the part where we talk about the muscles and the nervous system, it doesn't really matter about, say, 100%, 90% or anything like that. Is the goal is to try and get around that 9 out of 10 stimulus on the body. So making sure that you're not just pushing yourself to, say, this 90% when your body's not in that mindset or prime state to actually hit that. So don't stress too much, and make sure that when you are lifting, that you're consciously lifting it, right, and you're conscious of the target of what you're trying to do. So make sure you understand the stimulus that you're trying to elicit. So any other points that you want to bring up? I think
just it's worth reiterating the what gets measured gets managed point. That's ultimately what you care about. Like, that's the actual result, right? You're not worried about X% on X day and Y% on another day. You're worried about getting stronger over time. So having those cornerstone metrics that we've talked about in the programming podcast, and making sure that you are getting progress in the thing that matters, not on one session. It's long term. So always prioritize and monitor your long-term progress, rather than just getting really frustrated with maybe a week-to-week decrease. It's long-term progressive overloads. So always recording your sessions, and then you can see the bigger picture, rather than getting caught up in the minutiae of week-to-week training.
I think one other last one that I'd like to put in as well is, I think percentages are great for especially newbies. So someone that's quite new to training and stuff like that, because a lot of the time their maxes that they've lifted are not their actual maxes yet, because they're still developing their skill acquisition there. So there's still loads of room for improvement. So those percentages might be a bit better for them. And it's then helping, I guess, the athlete to understand what, say, 80% feels like roughly. And I think RPE gets a little bit better when you have more experience. You understand what an 8 out of 10 is. You understand what 2 reps from failure is. Like, you understand more about what's going on, rather than what's just written on a bit of paper. And I think that's where the percentages in RPE, like, everything has a place. And we want to make sure that's come across in this podcast, is like, it all has a place. It's just, the biggest thing you need to understand is why you're doing it. And I know I said that at the start of the takeaways, but it's like, understand why you're lifting and what you're trying to achieve. So anyway, enough of that. So thank you very much for listening. Really hope you enjoyed today. As always, you can find us on all the platforms: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to share the episode if you did enjoy it, and do share it with someone that you think often works way too hard in their training, or is a bit of a pussy at times. So as always, we would love any reviews you want to give us. If you like to head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review there. We'd appreciate that. Thanks a lot for your time. Thank you, Ash. and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.